Have you noticed it? The quiet ones are disappearing. Not violently, not dramatically, but like morning mist that retreats when the world grows too loud. The ones who once spoke of stillness, of truth, of the invisible threads that bind existence, they've gone silent. You used to see them in conversations about meaning, in circles where depth was currency. Now their chairs sit empty. Some say they've given up. Others say they were never real to begin with. But what if the truth is darker and more sacred than either? What if they've simply seen too much? What if in a civilization addicted to noise, the most rebellious act of all is silence? They haven't disappeared. We've simply forgotten how to see them. This is not their story. It's ours, the ones who remain, drowning in light, mistaking the echo for the song. We live in a world that has declared war on silence. Every pocket vibrates. Every surface glows. Every moment demands reaction, opinion, engagement. We scroll through infinite feeds of curated lives, each one a whisper promising we're missing something vital just beyond the next refresh. We mistake motion for momentum, activity for aliveness, the buzz of notifications for the pulse of existence itself. But beneath it all, beneath the headlines and hot takes, beneath the performances we call authenticity, something ancient is suffocating. Depth, the kind of depth that requires time. Stillness, the courage to sit with yourself when the world offers 1,000 escapes. We've built a civilization that runs on distraction, that monetizes our attention, that fragments our consciousness into bite-sized moments of engineered dopamine. And we wonder why we feel empty. We scroll, we react, we consume, we perform, we scroll again. The screens promise connection, but deliver isolation. They promise knowledge, but deliver information without wisdom. They promise presence, but trap us in an eternal elsewhere, haunted by what we're missing, unable to inhabit where we are. Silence has become unbearable, not because silence is empty, but because in silence, we hear what we've been running from. In stillness, the illusions crack. The performance exhausts itself. The self we've curated for likes and shares dissolves. And what remains is raw, unfiltered, uncomfortably real. So we fill every gap. We soundtrack our lives with podcasts, playlists, perpetual chatter. We turn existence into content, relationships into transactions, meaning into metrics. The modern world is not evil. It's worse than that. It's efficient. And efficiency has no time for the soul. If silence is the language of truth, why have we forgotten how to listen? What are we lost in this endless amplification? And who pays the price when a civilization forgets how to be still? To be spiritually awake in this age is to see the machinery behind the theater. It begins subtly, a question that won't dissolve, a moment of clarity that shatters the routine. Perhaps it's grief or solitude or a sudden recognition that the life you're living belongs to someone else's script. You begin to notice the patterns, the way conversations loop through the same anxieties, the way people pursue desires that aren't truly theirs, the way society offers solutions that only deepen the wound they claim to heal. Awakening is not enlightenment. It's not transcendence or some final arrival at peace. It's the burden of seeing. You see the impermanence that terrifies everyone into denial. You see the ego constructing castles from sand, defending them with rage and pride. You see the systems, economic, social, algorithmic, designed to keep people asleep, comfortable consuming. And you realize most people don't want to wake up. They call your questions overthinking, your depth too intense, your silence cold or distant. They offer pills for your awareness, distractions for your clarity, therapeutic frameworks to help you adjust. Because awakening is inconvenient. It doesn't optimize productivity. It doesn't fuel consumption. It asks uncomfortable questions about the price of comfort, the cost of convenience, the spiritual bankruptcy hidden beneath material abundance. You become like someone who's learned to see in the dark while everyone around you insists the darkness is normal, even beautiful. They think you're the one who's lost, the one who's broken. But you've simply stopped pretending. And that makes you dangerous. Not because you're angry or righteous or revolutionary, but because your very presence is a reminder of what they're avoiding. Your stillness disrupts their noise. Your questions unsettle their certainties. Your refusal to perform becomes, paradoxically, the most honest thing in the room. This is the loneliness of awakening. Not solitude, loneliness. The ache of recognizing truth in a world committed to illusion. The exhaustion of speaking a language no one else remembers. The quiet grief of watching people you love choose comfortable lies over liberating uncertainty. Is it enlightenment or exile? Perhaps both. Perhaps the price of seeing clearly is standing apart. Perhaps wisdom has always required distance from the crowd. But here's what they don't tell you about awakening. It doesn't make you special. It makes you responsible. Responsible for the truth you carry. Responsible for not weaponizing it against those still sleeping. Responsible for maintaining your clarity in a world designed to erode it. And that responsibility, over time, becomes unbearable. So the awake begin to disappear. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with. The modern world is not accidentally distracting. It's architecturally designed to fragment consciousness, to colonize attention, to keep you perpetually elsewhere. This is the attention economy. Your awareness is the resource. Your focus is the commodity. Every app, every algorithm, every piece of content is engineered to capture, hold, and monetize the one thing that makes you sovereign, your presence. And it works. We've become strangers to our own experience, tourists in our own lives. We no longer look at sunsets. We photograph them for validation. We don't have conversations. We collect talking points for social performance. We don't think. We react to what we're told to think about. The system doesn't need to lie to you. It just needs to control what you pay attention to. And attention, left unguarded, flows toward novelty, outrage, spectacle. The algorithm learns your triggers and feeds them back to you, creating a hall of mirrors where you encounter only reflections of your existing beliefs, amplified and radicalized. This is not a conspiracy. It's an emergent property of a system optimized for engagement over truth, for profit over wisdom, for stimulation over depth. The spiritually awake recognize this. They see that social media isn't a neutral tool for connection. It's a behaviorist laboratory where you're both subject and product. They see that the news cycle isn't information delivery. It's anxiety manufacturing. They see that consumer culture isn't about meeting needs. It's about creating dissatisfaction that only consumption can temporarily soothe. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Kant wrote about this, though he didn't live to see smartphones. He understood that we never experience reality directly, only through the categories our minds impose. But now those categories aren't just internal. They're coded into platforms, shaped by profit motives, designed by engineers optimizing for metrics that have nothing to do with human flourishing. We no longer perceive things as they are. We perceive them as they appear through the filter of algorithmic curation. The modern mind has become a marketplace, and the soul, that ancient, non-monetizable essence, has become a forgotten currency. But here's the terrible truth the awake must face. Most people aren't enslaved by this system. They're comforted by it. The distraction is a relief. The noise is a buffer against the void. The endless scroll is a trance they don't want to break. So when the awake try to point to the machinery, they're met not with curiosity, but with hostility. Because seeing the cage means confronting the bars. And most people would rather redecorate the cell than escape it. They're not evil. They are not stupid. They're asleep. And the system depends on them staying that way. This is why the awake withdraw. Not from arrogance or superiority, but from exhaustion, from the futility of offering water to those who've learned to drink sand, from a violence of watching people defend the very forces that diminish them. So they disappear, not loudly, not with manifestos or dramatic exits. They simply step back, delete the apps, stop performing, unsubscribe from the noise. They move to places where silence is still possible. Mountains, small towns, inner landscapes no algorithm can reach. They choose simplicity not as deprivation, but as liberation. Each possession released, each commitment reconsidered, each distraction refused. This is not escape. This is survival. Because to remain in the noise while holding clarity is to have your soul slowly eroded. The awake know this. They felt the pressure to numb out, to rejoin the sleepwalking, to accept that depth is a luxury the modern world can't afford. But they refuse. They carry candles into caves where the fire of wisdom still burns. They tend to practices the world calls useless: meditation, contemplation, honest self-inquiry. They read old books written by the dead who somehow understood our current moment. They sit in silence not because they're sad, but because they're listening to something the noise drowns out. From the outside, this looks like giving up, dropping out, failure to adapt. But these are not dropouts. They are guardians. Guardians of sanity in an age of manufactured madness. Guardians of depth in an age of surface. Guardians of the slow, patient work of becoming human in a world that wants to turn us into users, consumers, metrics. They're tending to the roots while everyone else is distracted by the branches. And yes, there's sorrow in this. The sorrow of separation. The ache of leaving behind people you love who can't or won't see what you see. The quiet mourning for a world that could be different if enough people woke up. But there's also something sacred in it. A recognition that not all battles are fought in public. That some revolutions happen in silence. That the most radical act in a world of constant performance is to stop performing and start being. They're disappearing from society. But they're not gone. They're in monasteries without walls, practicing presence. They're in forests remembering what it feels like to be held by something larger than human drama. They're in small communities building alternatives to the extraction economy. They're in solitude, doing the inner work that can't be rushed or commodified. They're preparing for what comes next, for the moment when the illusions collapse under their own weight, for the collective awakening that can only emerge when enough people have preserved the memory of what it means to be truly alive. The quiet ones haven't abandoned the world. They've withdrawn to remember it properly. But every disappearance carries the seed of a return. History teaches us this. When civilizations lose their way, there are always those who retreat to preserve what's essential. Monks copying manuscripts while empires burn. Mystics maintaining practices while religions calcify. Artists protecting beauty while cultures commercialize soul. The spiritually awake who've withdrawn are not hiding. They're incubating. They're letting the old forms of themselves die. The forms shaped by other people's expectations, by society's scripts, by the noise they once mistook for life. In that death, something new is being born. Something the world will eventually need, but isn't ready for yet. Because the system is breaking. You can feel it. The anxiety epidemic that no amount of therapy can cure because the wound is civilizational. The environmental crises that technology can't solve because the problem is spiritual. The loneliness pandemic in the most connected age in history. The suicide rates rising alongside stock markets. The illusion is cracking. And when it finally shatters, when enough people can no longer deny the emptiness beneath the abundance, the meaninglessness beneath the activity, the disconnection beneath the networks, they will look for those who remember. Those who maintain clarity while others chase distraction. Those who preserve depth while others surf surfaces. Those who tended the inner fire while others burned out in the spectacle. The quiet ones will return, not as saviors, not as gurus with answers, but as reminders. Reminders of what we forgot. Reminders that silence is not empty but full. That stillness is not stagnation but the ground of all movement. That you cannot find yourself in the noise. You can only lose yourself there. They will reappear, changed, deepened by solitude, clarified by absence, freed from a need to be understood by those who aren't ready. And they will speak differently, not to convince or convert, but to resonate with those who've begun their own awakening. Not to lead movements, but to validate the quiet rebellions happening in millions of private moments. They will remind us that depth is possible, that meaning is real, That presence is the most precious thing we possess. This is not optimism. It's observation. Every dark age ends. Every age of noise eventually exhausts itself. And when it does, those who've maintained their connection to something deeper become the seeds of what's next. So if you're one of them, one of the quiet ones who's felt the pull to withdraw, know this. Your disappearance is not defeat. Your silence is not weakness. Your refusal to participate in the machinery of distraction is not escape. It's preparation. The world doesn't need you to be louder. It needs you to be clearer. It doesn't need you to join the noise. It needs you to remember what exists beneath it. Be still. Be awake. Tend to your inner fire. Because the age of distraction is ending, and the age of depth is quietly being born in all the places you've gone to preserve it. The hidden ones are not lost. They're exactly where they need to be. And when the world is ready, when the noise finally exhausts itself, and people remember they're more than consumers, more than metrics, more than content, you will return, not to save anyone, but to remind them they were never truly lost. Just asleep. An awakening was always possible. In silence, we remember. In stillness, we return. In depth, we discover we were never alone. If you made it here, to the end of this reflection, then you already know. You've felt it, haven't you? That pull toward silence. That exhaustion with the noise. That sense that you're seeing something others refuse to acknowledge. That loneliness of being awake in a world that glorifies sleep. You're not broken. You're not overthinking. You're not too sensitive, too deep, too intense. You're remembering. And that remembering, that's what this channel exists to honor. This isn't entertainment. This isn't content. This is a gathering place for those who still believe depth matters. For those who refuse to let the noise erase what's sacred. For those who are quietly disappearing from the surface because they're diving beneath it. Every video here is a reflection, a reminder. A resonance for the parts of you the world tells you to silence. If this spoke to something in you, if you felt seen in these words, then you're not alone in the quiet. There are others. We're out here, in the stillness, in the margins, in the spaces between the noise. And we're building something, not loudly, not for algorithms or metrics, but for the soul's survival. So if you want to continue this journey, if you want to explore what it means to be awake in this age, to find meaning in the chaos, to remember what the world wants you to forget, then join us. Subscribe, not because I'm asking for it, but because you're choosing it, because you're saying, I refuse to let depth die. I refuse to let the noise win. I refuse to be alone in this awakening. Leave a comment. Tell me your truth. Share what this stirred in you, because every voice in the quiet matters. Every story of withdrawal, of awakening, of choosing presence over performance, it matters. And if this resonated with someone you know, someone who's been feeling this pull, this exhaustion, this sacred loneliness, share it with them. Not to convince them, but to remind them they're not the only one. The next video is coming. We'll go deeper. We'll explore the shadows the world refuses to acknowledge. We'll speak the truths that have no place in the marketplace. Because this is what we do here. We remember what it means to be human when the world wants to make us something less. We tend to the fire that still burns beneath the noise. We gather in the quiet, so we can return to the world when it's ready. Until then, be still. Be awake. You're not alone.